I'm Coach Tarek.
And I'm Vanessa.
We are your movement experts, and we are here to educate health and fitness professionals with the tools to create real change for and within the industry.
Welcome back to Purpose Driven Movement. I'm your host today, Vanessa. I'm so excited to talk about this subject that is very, very near and dear to my heart. I have Dr. Ashton Wilson coming on board to talk to us about hypermobility. As a coach of 17 years in the industry, the last 5 years have completely changed my mind on what it means to be hypermobile. And I hands down think it is one of the number one red flags that fitness and allied health professionals are not looking at when it comes to chronic pain, chronic injury in a lot of individuals who participate in the fitness industry. I wholeheartedly believe that way more of the population has at least a few hypermobile joints or is much more hypermobile than we realize. And if you're hypermobile and this resonates with you, please reach out. I would love to know what your journey is, what it's been, and how allied health professionals have worked with you in the past. I am really excited to bring this episode to you today. Give it a listen. I hope you're ready.
Check out FTI's latest offer, which is 15% off of any of our online courses. Simply go to www.functionaltraininginstitute.com and input PDM15 at cart checkout.
With me, I have Dr. Ashton Wilson. Welcome. So nice to have you.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thanks for having me on the show.
My pleasure. For those of you who might not have heard of Ashton, I actually found Ashton through social media. I mean, this is the beauty of social media these days. And I have been going down a rabbit hole. For those listeners who've been here a little bit more regularly, you'll know that I have this rabbit hole of hypermobility. And I've been searching for a health practitioner in Australia who deals with hypermobility. And I finally found you, Ashton. So let's start at the top. What is hypermobility?
Yeah, that's probably the most common question that I get in my practice. So hypermobility is a connective tissue disorder where the connective tissues around the joints and tendons and muscles have a little bit more elasticity in them than they do collagen. So when we think of what makes up our tissues in our body, we have collagen and we have elastin. And in a hypermobile body, there's a little bit more of an elastic property. So it means that the joints can go very easily beyond end range. Skin can sometimes be very stretchy, and it means that you can usually be very good at certain sports like gymnastics, dancing, swimming, all of those types of things where you require a lot of range of motion. And there are two different categories of hypermobility. So we have our hypermobile spectrum disorder, and then we have hypermobile of the Ehlers-Danlos syndromes. There's 13 subtypes. 12 of them have genetic markers, but unfortunately the hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome currently does not have a genetic marker available, so there is no genetic test. So hypermobility is really diagnosed based on the symptoms that you present with, as well as your clinical history. So your history of hypermobility, your history of your sport, your family history, and just really delving into what you've gone through in your journey so far.
Yeah, thank you. That's a really in-depth answer. And I think that's a really good medical answer. When I give the answer, it's not that exactly. Let's talk a little bit about hypermobility spectrum disorder, because I think, ESD, Ehlers-Danlos syndrome is probably the extreme case and maybe a little bit more rare. But I feel like the hypermobility spectrum is quite large and varied. And so as a practitioner, what do you kind of see in clients and in people that come to you for this?
Yeah, I think when we talk about the differences between hypermobility spectrum disorder and hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos, they're really similar. They have a lot of crossover, and really I like to think of them as being a spectrum altogether, and that you can kind of move along that spectrum. So depending on the number of symptoms and comorbidities that you have will depend on how far along the spectrum you are. So with hypermobile spectrum disorder, it was only classified in 2017, so it's still really a relatively new diagnosis. So we're still learning a lot about it. But what that does mean is it gives a lot of validation for people who have been experiencing pain and really undiagnosed symptoms for a long time, being able to have something to kind of like, as an umbrella term, give them something to hold on to. I think that it's a really good thing because before, what we used to call it was benign joint hypermobility. And when you think of the word benign, that comes with certain like stigmas and connotations, and you probably almost feel like, oh, well, it's not that serious. But we know that hypermobility spectrum disorder can be as intense as hypermobile Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So I think that it's really important that we have that spectrum there to give people a bit of an answer, to give people a direction, and to help them understand that they can move along the spectrum depending on how they manage their symptoms. So the other good thing as well with having hypermobility spectrum disorder is it recognizes things like peripheral joint hypermobility. So like for me, my upper limbs are where I'm most hypermobile. But if I was to do a Brighton score, I wouldn't score very high because my shoulders are more hypermobile. My fingers are quite hypermobile, but my lower body isn't. So being able to diagnose people based on their symptoms they present with and give them an actual answer is really important. It's really validating. It helps them understand what's going on with their body, and it helps them understand that there's hope and there's a way forward, as well as recognizing other things like historical hypermobility, where, you know, people in the past may have been very flexible, very hypermobile, and as they've grown older, their body has stiffened to protect their joints. And often with these type of people, this is where they get churned through the cycle of the medical system, because they go in saying, well, I've got all this pain, but I don't know why. And people just mark it down as chronic pain or anxiety related or some other kind of like diagnosis. Fibromyalgia gets thrown around a lot, when really, if you dig a little deeper into their history and you look at that historical hypermobility, it exists and it's there. And that as well gives them an answer. They understand why they feel the way they feel. So yeah, I feel as far as the progress of hypermobility spectrum disorder, I feel like we're learning more and more every day, every week. And it really does just give people hope, I think.
That's awesome. So many things have come up for me in what you said. I still work with clients as kind of half of what I do. And I thought I was going a little bit nuts for a second there, because I maybe see, you know, I have like maybe 15 to 20 sessions a week. That's not my main job anymore. It's not super busy. But I swear that 70% of my clients have hypermobility. And I think that, you know, obviously I see a higher concentration of hypermobility than other people, but I would be seeing it in people who have no idea that they were hypermobile. And it might be similar to yours, you know, like more joint related or an upper extremity or a lower extremity. But I feel like I see it way more than it's like medically said that it exists in people. What's your thoughts around what's emerging and what are you seeing in your practice as well with people, and maybe what are some of the common things that come through?
I think you're bang on that a lot of people living with hypermobility and hypermobility related pain, it's being really misdiagnosed, because I don't think it's a rare condition. And I think the more that we are researching into it, we're realizing it's not as rare as once thought, but it is really rarely understood. So many practitioners don't understand what to look for. And when you think about going through university, I mean, I know myself, when we went through uni, we were taught to look for movement restriction. But what happens when you've got someone who walks through the door who has no restriction in movement? And they're saying, but I've got pain. Oh, but you can't have pain because you can bend forward and touch the floor. And it really is like it plays on everything you were ever taught, because it's not what you expect. It's kind of that the unexpected presentation that throws a lot of healthcare practitioners. And that's when a lot of people experiencing hypermobility, unfortunately, get churned through the cycle of medical appointments and unnecessary scans and unnecessary testing, because people don't think that that amount of movement could actually be causing pain. It doesn't quite compute. And so a lot of the time what I'm finding is people who are coming through to see me, probably more recently, I think that there is much more awareness of it, but I still see a lot of people who have seen everyone. They've seen every practitioner you can imagine. And then it's usually been their PT or their osteo or their physio who's seen me on Instagram or has spoken to me in person, who has said, you know, I don't really know what to do anymore. Why don't you go and see Ash? And then we communicate. And then I help that person understand what's going on with their body. And it really is just about the more we can spread awareness to other practitioners and other people in the healthcare industry, the more we can help better understand and better diagnose this condition, you don't need to know everything about it to recognize it. And even just recognizing it, it can point that person in the right direction, and that can be a game changer for them.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. That's really cool. You talked a little bit about, I called it the Baton score, but you called it the Biden score.
I think depending on who you speak to, I think I usually call it Baton. And then I heard a podcast the other day where they called it Biden. I thought, all right, well, I'll adapt to that. Maybe that's my Australian accent.
Maybe, I don't know. Either way, Baton or Biden, potato, potato. Could you go through, number one, what do you use it for? And is it something that practitioners, PTs, fitness enthusiasts can use on their own just to kind of like see if it's perhaps something an issue for them? Or is that something you definitely would want them to do with a medical professional?
It's a really easy and quick test to do. It can give you an indication if someone may have hypermobility. It's not a thorough diagnostic tool. So it can give you a good indication, and it's definitely something I still use in practice because it can show you a little bit about what that person might be experiencing globally across their body. And it's something that, when I teach my course, I teach everyone who's in there how to look for these things and what kind of angles you're looking for and what kind of score might indicate that this person might be hypermobile. As far as a diagnostic tool, it's not very specific and it doesn't encompass all the joints. So there are other tests that are being developed currently, like the upper limb hypermobility score and the lower limb hypermobility score, which are being developed and tested to see if there's more sensitivity for diagnosing these conditions. But I mean, as well, when you are in practice and you have, maybe 30 minutes with this person, absolutely use it. And it'll give you an idea with those few movements, whether this person may or may not be hypermobile and whether that's contributing to their current problem.
Yeah, really cool. I'm a massive proponent of definitely PTs learning the Biden score test. I think it's important. The biggest ones for me, I think, who should really know the signs, Pilates and yoga teachers. I find the percentage of Pilates and yoga teachers who are hypermobile incredibly huge because most of them have come from a dance background or a gymnastic background. And like you said before, your body moves in things that it's already good at. So if you have a big range of motion, you have beautiful long lines as a Pilates teacher, you're way more likely to jump into that profession, right? And Pilates is great for joint stability around hypermobility. For me, it's been really useful. I think it's fantastic. But on the opposite side of it, some yoga modalities have been really detrimental to me, like caused me quite a lot of pain and discomfort and contributed to slipping limbs and slipping ribs and SI joint and all this kind of interesting stuff. What's your take on Pilates and yoga and maybe even just kind of general strength training for your hypermobile clients? What do you think's a good go-to?
I think the best go-to is an exercise you want to do. I think that some people I work with are high-level athletes. And so for them, the thing that they love is the sport that they do. And so it's really important to remember when it comes to any kind of exercise or any kind of rehab or any kind of sport that you're doing, it has to be something you really care about, because then you'll care enough to want to do what it takes to do the work to be able to be better at it and feel better with it. When it comes to things like Pilates and yoga, I think particularly with yoga, a lot of hypermobile people will find they're quite naturally good at yoga because they can just get into the positions very easily. The hard part is holding that position and as well, making sure that you're not going beyond your end range in that position. And so often what I'll do, depending on the client in front of me, is I will ask them, what is the thing that you like doing? And sometimes they have nothing. Sometimes they've been so broken by previous exercise that they're not doing anything. So it's finding that thing that they might be able to do. But if they're coming into me and they are pre-existing Pilates goers or yogis or whatever, often what I'll do is try and help them better understand their own body awareness. So to help them understand, look, you might be able to get into this position, but is it a good position for you? Can we back that position off a little bit and focus more on the stability and the strength as opposed to the mobility? Because we know you can get there, but can you control it? And so it's really just about changing that shift in the mindset as to why you're doing something. like really having a focus as to why you're doing it so that we understand I'm doing this with a purpose. It's that purposeful movement that I think is so important when it comes to rehabilitating a hypermobile body, as well as communicating with whoever they're working with. So if I have a hypermobile client who's currently at a Pilates studio, I'll reach out to that studio and say, I've got your client here. I recognize they're hypermobile. They train with you. Can we have a chat? And so I can tell you what I see and if there's anything you notice on your end. And just having that level of communication and being able to work together and understand, it helps that client feel really supported. It helps them feel like they're not alone, and it helps them feel like they're not crazy. Because if more than one person is seeing this, and, you know, everyone's working together to try and help them, it's a really incredible power to be able to give that person what they need and the support that they need to move forward.
No, that's awesome. That's such a great answer. I wholeheartedly agree with the do what you love always. It's such a great message. I think it's excellent. The question that I asked a friend this morning, I said that I was speaking to you today. She's a yogi. And the question was, if you're hypermobile and you know you're hypermobile, should you work in your end range, or should you hold back from that end range and kind of work, 80-90% of that range? Because this is a question that I ask myself as well.
It's a good question. I would always say to be able to work in your end range, you need to be able to control your end range. So for a hypermobile person, it's very easy to get to end range because that's where we feel the most stable. So if you can be in that position and you can control that end range, and a lot of the time, like particularly with my gymnast athletes and my dance athletes, I will work with them to control their end range because, like you said, like getting those beautiful lines and, getting to those really like an on-point position for a ballet dancer, let's say, you need to be able to get to end range, and you can, but can you control it? So what I would say to your friend is it really depends. If you have built enough control to be able to perform the movement at end range, I would say yes, but I feel that you have to earn the right to do that. So what I would suggest, if you are someone who is hypermobile and you're doing yoga and you're noticing that certain moves are causing discomfort, like the first one I can think of, I had a client this morning who does yoga and said the downward dog position really upsets her shoulders. So what I suggested to her was, well, what we need to do is be able to get you more stable in a plank position first. So let's work on taking you away from that end range where everything's locked out and you're just holding position. And let's peel back the layers of this onion. Let's work from the first layer and then we work our way to that position where you're at end range, because you will be able to build that control better if you have the foundations to build upon. So yeah, what I would say to your friend is if you've earned the right to train at end range, you can do so. But if you are pushing to end range because that's what feels easy, then I would really encourage to back that off and train at mid-range or train at a little bit below the end range and really focus on building that stability there and then move towards end range training.
That's awesome. Such a good answer. And I think I'd love to go a little deeper in this. So you mentioned that hypermobile people love end range because you feel the most stable there. Is that to do with the level of proprioception that they have in the joint at that end range? Like, what do you think is the reason they feel that there?
Yeah, absolutely. Proprioception has a big part to do with it. So when a joint moves to end range, it's at its locked out position. So pretty much like using the knee, for example, if the knee goes into hyperextension for a hypermobile person, that's at its maximum congruency, which means that it's the maximum amount of surface area that the two bones have together. That gives you a sense of stability. But what that's doing is that's overloading certain muscles and certain tissues that are now on a maximum stretch, right? They are being maximally stretched out to allow for that stability of the lockout position. So when we talk about why a hypermobile person will often like to stay in range, it's about the proprioception, but it's also about the ability to stay upright. The body will do what it can to fight gravity because being hypermobile, it is a constant battle against gravity. Gravity is kind of winning. And so we lock all our joints out to end range because that's how we fight it. That's how we stay upright as a human. And that's how we can continue to move around as such. So yeah, when we talk about retraining things like posture, which is something I do a lot with my clients, I'm not talking about your posture looking a certain way. It's the posture of your joints, the alignment of your joints as you are doing certain things. So the alignment of the knee as you are standing, and teaching your body to be stable in a non-end range position, because that is more optimal for the joint. That is more optimal for the body. If you can make those stability muscles work, then you'll be able to hold yourself up a lot easier, but it does take work. It takes time to build that, because you're building upon something that has never been there before, because you've always relied on locking your joints out at end range to hold you up. Now you're asking your muscles to do it. So yeah, it's a combo of the proprioceptive feedback as well as that stability against gravity.
Yeah, that's awesome. Put so simply as well. And one of the biggest coaching points for me with my hypermobile clients is getting them to unlock their knees. It changes their entire, like literally their entire structure. You can see like their pelvis shift, and then their shoulders move, and then all of a sudden their head's in the middle, and you're like, unlock the knees, and a lot of the things that you have will feel a lot better. I'd love to go even just a little deeper here. So we're talking about, you mentioned that that constant stretch now. So we're in that hypermobile end range. We're in constant stretch. We're looking at an eccentric load, right? So I just wanted to put it out there, and I love your thoughts. I'm not sure if you've gone down this path, but holding an eccentric load submaximally for what? 6, 7, 8 hours a day, like that is enormously taxing on the human body, isn't it? Right? Like that's huge. So even if you could just take yourself out of that end range, that eccentric load, like that's huge for people's pain, isn't it?
Absolutely. I think that what I try and encourage people, and particularly practitioners or, people in the fitness industry who are a little bit afraid of what to do with a hypermobile body, it's not complicated. Like it's a complex condition, but the solution isn't complicated. They're very simple solutions. It's just a matter of actually doing them. And you're right, holding that amount of load through a tissue. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine that feeling. Like I'm just thinking now of like holding an RDL, like under load, anyway, that was just my brain just going on a little tangent. But you're right. When I explain it to a person, trying to break it down simply, your body, your muscles in your body are working twice as hard as the next person, because your muscles are not only working hard to perform movement, but they're also now working hard to try and stabilize your joint. So they are constantly under load. They're constantly exhausted. And so then we have this, like you said, this eccentric loading that is contributing to this fatigue and the pain and the sensations that we feel. And then, we sleep maybe 6 to 8 hours at night and then do it all again the next day. Like the recovery isn't enough. So just making those little changes throughout the day, like you said, of just unlocking those knees for just that little bit can actually make a huge impact.
Yeah, that's cool. Sorry, my tiny little mind got a bit blown there for a second. I mean, I delve into this relatively often, but I'm so fascinated by this subject because of what we've been saying is, I think, heavily misdiagnosed or missed completely by a lot of people. And I don't think it's necessarily their fault that they miss it, because they just don't know that they need to look for it. So I'm really big on the awareness piece for this. The thing that I find challenging, and I think maybe this is where a lot of practitioners or PTs or coaches miss, is that the fact that quite a few of my hypermobile clients present the opposite. Like you said, they present completely stiff, can't move at all. And if you had maybe like a couple of case studies or a couple of points, in fact, when you do see someone present super stiff, what typically happens during a treatment or treatments that they're coming in for pain? Do they respond quicker? Do they not respond quickly? Like what's common that you've noticed?
So when we talk about this stiffening with hypermobility, often there is a history of hypermobility. So there's a history where they have been, maybe they say, I was double jointed when I was younger, or I used to do gymnastics when I was younger, or I used to be able to throw my leg over my head. Something that will be like, I had this party trick I could do, and now they can no longer do the thing, and they have this stiffness associated with their body. So that stiffness is a protection mechanism from the body. There has been multiple micro traumas to the area, and now there is this stiffening that has occurred to prevent any further damage, basically. That's my easiest way of explaining what's happening. So then what will typically happen is they will too get missed in the system. Like you said, they won't get that proper diagnosis because particularly the stiffening through the back is a common one where, they won't be able to touch their toes. And the first thing you look at in the Baden/Beighton score is, can you bend forward and touch your hands flat on the ground without bending your knees? So often what I'll find with that type of person, and I've got one case currently in particular I'm thinking of, often they will have the same challenges with stability. So the same challenges exist. It's just that they have this like physiological stiffening of the tissues. So what needs to happen with this type of client is the same thing you would do with someone who's presenting with a full +7 on the Beighton score, full hypermobility, all the comorbidities. The same, you treat them the same because the stability issue is still a problem. That's why we've ended up here. So what I would typically do with that type of client is the same that I would do with any other type of hypermobile client, is I would assess them and work out exactly what they can do. So first of all, always I look for what they can do. Can they do the certain things I'm asking them to do? Can they stabilize through their feet? Can they unlock their knees effectively? Can they adjust their pelvis? Can they draw down through their ribs to engage the abdominal? I look at all of these things first, and then I work out, well, what do we need to do for this individual person? So for a stiff hypermobile person, it's very much the same as a non-stiff hypermobile person. The stability training will still be the same because we need to build the foundation. Everything is about the foundations and then building on top of that. Just because they're stiff and they can't move very well through their lumbar doesn't mean that they're stable, right? So always what I will do is the postural training starting from the feet, working all the way up, and then making sure that they are then aware of what's happening in their body. Everything that we do comes down to building awareness, building an understanding of what their body is doing and why it's doing it. Can you feel this? Can you engage this? Can you move this way? Everything is about connecting with the body. And especially when you're dealing with someone, when you think of the type of person who's got stiff hypermobility, they're often older. They've often gone through a lot of medical trauma in their life, of being dismissed, of being invalidated. And, ultimately what they need is someone who just will listen to them and someone who will treat them just like any other person. Like they're not making it up. You understand it. You get it. You just build the foundations and then you work from there. Whatever their goals are, you work towards it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I've seen that in the cases that I deal with, stiff hypermobile humans, so much dismissal of pain. And I think what's important here is there's a couple of tangents that I want to go down. You might have to remind me because I get tangent crazy. Number one, I'd love to explore this stability thing with you. But I think before we go into that, what's really important to factor in, like you said, is that emotional trauma that comes with constantly feeling like you have a niggle or something wrong or some injury, and then you having a stiffness or tightness or pain and people telling you that there's nothing there or there's nothing happening. It's just so traumatizing. And when I explain to PTs, what does anxiety feel like? What does stress feel like? It feels like tense, right? It feels like my muscles are on and I feel stiff. That's what people are experiencing, I think, when you're talking about that stiff hypermobility, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's protection in many ways, like protection for the stability of your body, but also protection from any kind of emotional trauma that you've been through. And particularly, like you said, going through a system where you're told that you're wrong and you're gaslit into believing that you're making it up. And, so many times I'll have a client come in, and the first time they come in, and when I talk to them and explain what I see, and I just, it may even be like only in the first 20 minutes that we're getting to know each other, and they'll often cry. There is so much emotional baggage that they're carrying, all these years of having no answers, all these years of living in pain, of being told that you're wrong, you're making it up, it's all in your head, all these really negative things. When all these people want is to be heard. They just want to be heard and be treated as a regular person with a problem that shouldn't be complicated to solve. Like, it's not complicated stuff. You just have to listen to the person and then actually treat them as an individual. Just because it's a bit different doesn't mean it can't be done.
Yeah, really good, really important. We keep talking about stability. I would love to explore this concept of stability because, not only do hypermobile people need stability, we all kind of need stability training. I'm a big sensory human. So, for me, more contact time with the ground in any capacity, I think, is excellent for stability. What are the best parameters for coaches, for PT, for allied health, or for just any fitness enthusiast listening to this who are going, oh yeah, this is me. I am this person. person, what are these factors that are important to gain stability?
So the first thing I would say is, what are your feet doing? I always look at the feet first. Like, that is your connection to the ground. That is your grounding. Yeah, I love that. I am a big barefoot fan. Like, I spend most of my, I didn't have to wear shoes at work because of my work. I wouldn't wear them, because the more time you can spend barefoot, the more connection you build with the ground. So often what I'll encourage my clients and their trainers, their PTs, their coaches, their Pilates instructors, whoever it might be, is to get them barefoot. Whenever you are training, train barefoot. It will help so much with your connection to the ground. It'll help so much with the connection to your body. So I'll always say, train barefoot, you'll feel more stable immediately. Because when you think about the type of shoes and footwear that we wear these days, all of it is like massive cushioning, and there is a place for footwear, like totally. And I think for any runners out there, you'll know how obsessive it can get, like looking at the different technologies that are coming out in runners that can make you feel elite. But when we're talking about a hypermobile person, the thicker the shoe, the further away from the ground you are and the less stable you're going to feel. So there's a little bit of a misconception when it comes to stability, that we think we need a cushioned, like thick shoe for stability. What that actually does is it takes away any movement your foot could possibly do to stabilize you naturally, because the shoe kind of does the work. And so when I try and explain this to people, and every time, whenever I start working with a hypermobile person, we always start at the feet and work our way up, and their shoes are always up, shoes and socks off. You want to think about your body as being a house. So when we build a house, we start at the ground. We build the foundations first, because we need strong foundations for strong wall, strong house. Otherwise we get cracks in it and it starts to break down. If you don't have the right foundations, the house will not survive. It will come down. So you want to think about your feet and the training of your feet as being the foundations for a strong body. So I'll always do lots of foot strengthening, lots of proprioceptive training through the feet, just lots of barefoot walking that involves being barefoot for more times throughout the day. I will encourage. Now, in saying that, a hypermobile foot, which a lot of people with hypermobility will have hypermobile feet. I also have no issue with these people with really hypermobile feet using things like an orthotic. Okay, think of an orthotic as being like a crutch. It gives you a little bit of support to give your feet a rest, right? It's the same as like sitting down for a little bit. You sit down for a little bit to give your body a rest. You put your foot into a shoe with an orthotic to give it a little bit of rest. We don't rely on the orthotic to do the work because we're doing the strength training. We just give our feet a little bit of a break by wearing an orthotic. So I'm always a big believer in starting from the feet and working our way up when it comes to stability. The next thing we're going to look at is the trunk and the core. Now, core work, I feel like, has gotten a real like bad rap in the last like 5 to 10 years. I think core work is so important, especially for a hypermobile person. The trunk is kind of like, it's the center of where your limbs move around. And when you have like long, gangly, hypermobile limbs, you need a stable as core to help control everything. So I will often encourage people to start doing some core training, particularly doing core training that can be done lying down. So these things are really good for when people are experiencing pain flare-ups, or if they're getting any POTS-like symptoms. They can actually lie down and still do some exercise and still feel like they've committed to their bodies. So I do like prescribe quite a lot of core exercises, usually lying down, and then I'll progress them to being standing up so that it becomes a little bit more functional. But yeah, when we talk about stability, it's really focusing on the grounding of the foot, the stability of the core, and then the stability of every other joint around that. That's usually how I will structure my appointments and my treatment plans with my clients.
Yeah, I feel like core and stability are interesting kind of buzzwords. And I feel like it's kind of hard to get to the center of what it is. But I'm a massive proponent of barefoot. I think that it's super interesting. The information that you can get from just not having shoes or socks on your feet is really cool. And like you said, I see so much hypermobile arch collapsing. So many people's, like you said, your foot's tired, all of a sudden the arches start to collapse and then everything else kind of like caves in from there. Yeah, I think that the hypermobile spaces, we're really just kind of scratching the surface. I'm interested to see where this kind of goes. And I think if you've got any resources, please let me know. I'll chuck them all in the show notes for our listener to follow through. My last couple of questions is, what are some of the risk factors for people who maybe have hypermobility and are doing some kind of physical activity, what should they be looking out for in their body?
I think the first one is pain, because you can be hypermobile but experience no pain. And that's totally fine too. Like if you have no pain and you're hypermobile, that's brilliant. Go for it. If you can control your joints at end range, you can do whatever you want to do. If you have no pain, your body is telling you it's safe. And so if you can control your end range, happy days. So if you are getting pain as a feedback from your body from doing something, that's your body telling you something is wrong. Something is not right here. So that's where if you are doing an exercise or an activity and you're experiencing pain over and over and over again, you need to listen, because your body will just keep screaming it louder and louder and louder until the point that you can't do anything anymore. So this is where, again, body awareness comes into it, because you want to really be able to understand what are the capabilities of your body and what are its limits, and how do we work around that and find that fine balance. Because often with a hypermobile body, it needs movement. A hypermobile body needs movement to be stable, but we need to also find what is the limit of that movement. So it's working within that threshold that's really important. I don't think there are people with opinions that there are certain exercises or certain movements that should be avoided for a hypermobile body. I don't think that there are any. I think that everything can be trained. I think that if you have potentially like a history of dislocations, particularly shoulder, then that's where, we probably need to work out what are your goals? What are your priorities? Because if you have a history of shoulder dislocations, but you want to be a tennis player, then we need to be able to get your arm above your head. That's the reality. So if that's your goal, then we need to work out, okay, because we've had a history of dislocations, do we need to look at a surgical option? Do we need to look at more structured rehab? If that's your goal, we need to work out a way to get you there. But if your goal is, okay, I've had multiple dislocations, but all I really want to be able to do is put my t-shirt on in the morning, well, then that's a different goal. And we can go, okay, well, how can we further stabilize your shoulder to reduce the risk of a further dislocation? Because dislocations are part of the risk of being hypermobile. So I think that it really is goal dependent as to the kind of advice I would give to people as far as what to do in the gym or what kind of activities they should be wary of, because there's risk with everything we do. You could walk out the door and fall over. That's a risk, but you're still going to go out for that walk, even knowing the risk. So again, goal dependent. I think if the goal is what it is, we just work towards that goal, but we've got to have those logical steps in place to know how to get there.
Yeah, no, that's perfect. It's a great answer. Last question, and I ask this question to all of our guests. If you had the ability to instantly change, and I'm going to use the fitness industry here rather than osteo and allied health, but if you had the ability to change anything in the fitness industry, right now, what would that change be for you?
Oh, that's such a good question. If I could change anything, I think it would be having a supportive environment, no matter what studio you walk into. So an environment where you feel supported, cared for, there's an understanding that pain can mean injury, because I think that there is still, and I notice it in our area, there are some really great coaches and PTs that I work with, but there are still certain gyms that push people to really work, to just push past their pain. And I really would love to see a world where we have a better understanding of what people are capable of and just listened to that a little bit more, because I think that the old no pain, no gain is absolute garbage. I think that it shouldn't have to be painful. It shouldn't have to be difficult. And I think if we could have a fitness industry that really supported people in their own personal journey a little bit more, I think that we'd have a lot more people who would be more inclined to want to train, to want to do exercise. I see it so often, how many people have fear associated with going to the gym. Where does that stem from? I think a lot of that stems from people feeling like they're being judged, or feeling like people don't understand them, or they're being made to do things they don't want to do, or push past their pain. And maybe if we just listened a little bit more, I'd like to see that change.
I love that answer. Thank you so much for that. I wholeheartedly resonate with that completely, so much. Ashton, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Our listener really, really appreciates it. Listeners, you listening at home, anyone here, thank you. If you're interested in what Ashton does and some resources about hypermobility, please check out the show notes. Otherwise, thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. It's been great to chat.
We'll chat to you soon on PDM.
Thank you for being a part of our podcast community. If you haven't already, we would be honored if you would consider subscribing and following us on your favorite platform. That way, you'll never miss an episode and you'll be the first to know when new episodes are released. We truly appreciate your support, and we can't wait to continue to grow and connect with you through our podcast.